Okay, to show that our good postal service has deliveries any place in the universe, I have the pleasant task of canceling here on the moon the first stamp of a new issue dedicated to commemorate United States achievements in space. And I'm sure a lot of people have seen pictures of the stamp. I have the first one here on an envelope. At the bottom it says United States in Space, a decade of achievement. And I'm very proud to have the opportunity here to play postman and pull out a cancellation device. Cancel this stamp. It is August the 2nd, 1971, first day of issue. And we'll deliver it when we return.
It's a Seaton and Pair for episode 6, and it's a continuous illustration of a moon buggy and lunar module on the moon's surface. The bottom reads, United States in Space, a decade of achievement, and the face values for each stamp were $8 There is a postmark, and I was able to make out some of it, Seattle, WA for Washington State, and PM71 at the bottom. I was unable to make out anything for a month and day. They each measured 40 by 25 millimeters, and they're gonna make for a very interesting episode. These stamps were issued as a joint pair in 1971 to coincide with the flight of Apollo 15 and to celebrate the 10th anniversary of Project Mercury, which saw the first US man in space and the first US man to orbit the Earth. Now, this episode is going to be about a scandal, one that embarrassed NASA. It caused 4 astronauts to never fly another space mission again. The US Congress got involved, and it changed the way that Apollo and future shuttle missions handled standard operating procedures. The scandal, believe it or not, involved stamp collecting and a moon mission. So let's get started with the moon mission. Apollo 15 was the 4th manned mission to land on the moon, taking place over 12 days in July and August of 1971. It was the first to use the lunar rover, which allowed astronauts the ability to journey over extended distances from the lunar module. The crew consisted of Commander David R. Scott, lunar module pilot James B. Irwin, and command module pilot Alfred M. Worden. This was an extremely successful mission. Not only did it debut the moon buggy, but it was also the longest time spent on the moon at that point, and there was a strong emphasis on obtaining scientific data and geological samples. They also launched a sub-satellite that orbited the moon for over a year, collecting additional data. And it involves the coolest first day ceremony that any stamp has received, hands down, but more about that later. So what is the scandal that tarnished the careers of the astronauts and clouded the success of Apollo 15? Well, it's about taking souvenirs into space. As an astronaut in the Apollo missions, you could take a small bag of personal artifacts. These were known as either APKs, astronaut preference kits, or more commonly PPKs, personal preference kits. The bag was about this size and was usually made out of some kind of non-flammable material. And astronauts would typically carry souvenirs for friends and family that they would take up into space, just for the sake of being able to say that you have an item that went to space and back. Now, there's a couple of rules to this. Each of the items in an astronaut's PPK need to be authorized by NASA. And they must not lead to any direct financial benefits to the astronauts. So an astronaut should not accept any money for taking somebody's jewelry up to space and back so that they can wear a necklace that had orbited the moon, for example. The rules made sense. The Apollo missions were funded by taxpayers' money, and a lot of the public believed that it was a waste of money. So seeing an astronaut benefit financially from taking an item or two into space would not have gone down well. Also, weight matters. Taking items that are not critical to the mission success up into space would have ultimately burned more fuel. So it was common for astronauts to each take up a PPK filled with items into space, and they also took 1 or 2 PPKs and placed them in the lunar module so that those ones could actually land on the moon. Just to give you an example of what they took, the ones that they placed in the lunar module included a family friend's wedding ring, currency, medallions, and flags. But the most common item that was taken up into space in these PPKs were philatelic covers. Now, if you're unfamiliar with what a philatelic cover is, it's an item of postal stationery such as an envelope or a postcard that is prepared and sent through the mail, or even just cancelled by the post office and sent nowhere, just for the purpose of creating a collectible item. It's usually postmarked on a special day related to the subject, and in this case I have one in use at the Kennedy Space Center when the lunar module was on the moon for Apollo 15. This collection of art and postage represents a point in time and makes for a very cool souvenir. Many collectors love these items, and they make their own for other perfect souvenir moments, such as first flights or flying on a Zeppelin, or even just the first day that a stamp is issued. So of course a philatelist would be very interested in sending something up into space and back. This was done on space missions before, including Apollo 11 with Neil Armstrong. As you can imagine, an item such as this that was signed by the crew and actually landed on the moon would be very valuable. Before I get to the scandal, another philatelic wow was something called an insurance cover. Basically, the Apollo astronauts couldn't afford life insurance because they were about to get on a rocket and launch themselves to the moon, so insurance premiums would be horrifically expensive. So one of the key things that they did was they signed a number of covers, such as this one. If they were killed on this mission, then these covers would become valuable. They left the covers with their family. In the event that they were killed, they would then auction these off and be able to pay for their day-to-day lives, as well as even sending their kids to college. This is one of the actual insurance covers from the Apollo 15 mission. You can see their 3 signatures, as well as the postmark dated on the morning of the launch. These particular ones were later sold in 2009 by Worden. And here's a certificate of authenticity where he states that the purpose of these covers was to provide for the crew families in the event that the crew did not return from their flight. There was no other insurance available to the crews because of the risk of flights to the moon. Now, in each case, days before the launch, a third party would step in and offer to pay for the insurance premiums, but these covers are said to have allowed the astronauts to sleep at night knowing that their families would be taken care of. It's just amazing how philately played such a key role in these space missions. Now, let's get back to the scandal. The astronauts were approached by somebody who presented a business proposition on behalf of a German stamp dealer known as Hermann Seeger. The proposal was that the astronauts take 100 covers to the moon and back and give them to Seeger, who can then sell them. In return, Seeger would pay each of the astronauts $7,000 in the form of an investment in a bank account under their names. So the astronauts agreed to this, and they decided to take an additional 100 covers each for themselves to later sell as well. So that's 400 covers, 100 covers for Seeger and 100 covers for each of the astronauts. The only condition was that neither the astronauts nor Seeger could sell any of the covers until after the Apollo program had ended. The program lasted through Apollo 17, with of course the Apollo-Soyuz test project. But this is important because the astronauts did not want NASA to find out. This is clearly breaking the rules. They didn't want to jeopardize their participation in future Apollo missions. Now, each of the 400 envelopes consisted of a cachet, which was the Apollo 15 badge, and wings and a propeller indicating that the crew served in the Air Force. The 100 envelopes for Seeger had the first man on the moon stamp, while the remaining 300 for the crew had a variety of different stamps.
All aspects of the countdown still go for Apollo 15, still aiming for...
Now, just after midnight on the morning of the launch, the 400 covers were taken to the Kennedy Space Center post office to get postmarked. They were then packaged carefully and given to Commander Scott as they prepared for the launch. Apparently NASA did not know about this, and it certainly wasn't approved for the launch, but they were not stored in a PPK. These PPKs were already packed onto the command module or the lunar module several days before. So Scott placed them in one of his leg pockets in his spacesuit. They would stay in his pocket for the entire duration of the Apollo 15 mission. And so a few hours later, on July 26, 1971, the crew members carrying 643 covers took off for the moon. Yes, wait, hold up. There were 243 covers that were approved by NASA. There were a variety of interesting covers provided by friends and family, including 2 covers from the US Postal Service. Most were stored in PPKs. Of course, NASA did not approve and may not have known about the other 400 that were stored in Commander Scott's pocket. Okay, continue. 4 days later, on July 30th, Scott and Irwin landed on the moon's surface with the lunar module. They captivated the world with the moon buggy that seemed to speed between the moon's mountains, and they performed a number of important scientific experiments. On the final moments of staying on the moon, August 2nd, Scott cancelled a postage stamp for the United States Postal Service. It is the Seaton and Pear that are pulled from the box. August 2nd became the first day of issue for these stamps, and Scott was ceremoniously cancelling these stamps that were commemorating this mission and the 10 years that preceded it. That has to be the coolest way to cancel a stamp and the coolest first day ceremony ever. Now, Scott was being filmed by Irwin as he was cancelling the stamps, and he was using a special cancelling device in which the postmark reads United States on the Moon, August 2nd, 1971. He did it twice because the first one wasn't too clear, and you can see a finger smudge on the left side from his dirty moon gloves.
I've got several dusty thumbprints. I'll stick this back in our special mail pouch here, and we'll deliver it when we return.
Dave, this is Houston.
Go ahead.
Roger, we're wondering if you could use that to mail home an ounce of rocks, please.
An ounce? All right. I'll do that. I bet we could.
As you can imagine, this is a priceless item. It's never been sold, and the USPS gave it to the Smithsonian National Postal Museum. While Scott and Irwin were on the moon's surface, Worden was conducting experiments from the command module above. Now, 242 of the covers were in PPKs in the command module, while the 400 unauthorized covers were on the moon in Scott's pocket. Also, the one first day cover that was cancelled on the moon was in the lunar module, along with the PPKs that had the wedding ring and other medallions and souvenirs. By mistake, when the lunar module was jettisoned as the astronauts prepared to return home, they realized that the PPK with the wedding ring was left inside. Can you imagine what that must have felt like? Watching the lunar module disappear into space and then realizing that the wedding ring and other items of value were still on board. At least the covers were okay, but still.
Jettison complete. We're on our way home. You did bring the PPKs from the Falcon, right? Right?
Oh. Anyway, they landed safely back on Earth on August 7th in the North Pacific Ocean. The crew was picked up by the recovery ship, the USS Okinawa, and while on board, the crew purchased the newly issued stamps and applied them to each of the 400 covers. Well, they actually realized there was only 398 because they miscounted their 300 before the launch. The crew then got the ship's post office to cancel each of the stamps. The astronauts each signed the bottom left, and on the 100 Seeger covers, Irwin and Scott further confirmed that the covers landed on the moon with signatures. While on the 298 cruise covers, they assigned a number to each of them. Shortly upon their return, the astronauts sent the 100 covers to Seeger, mission complete and a success. Well, not quite. Actually, not at all, because Seeger began selling those covers immediately, breaking the promise, and they sold 99 of the 100 covers, keeping one for themselves, and the astronauts panicked once they found out. They gave the $7,000 back to Seeger and surrendered the 298 covers to NASA, along with a few others. This was a big mess for NASA. A full investigation was launched, and many people got involved, including the US Congress. By next year, the astronauts were reprimanded. They never flew a space mission again and were taken off the roster for back crew in an upcoming flight. It even expanded to an Apollo 13 astronaut who had a level of involvement, and he was removed from the Apollo Soyuz crew. It was bad, and the mission that was deemed the most successful endeavor in space was now tainted with this scandal. So fast forward to 1983, Worden, the command module pilot, files a lawsuit against NASA to get the covers back. Well, NASA just gives the covers back. So therefore the 100 Seeger and the 298 crew covers are out there in circulation today. They're very expensive, as you can imagine. The reason why NASA just gave the 298 covers back to Worden was probably because of what they were doing on the Space Shuttle Challenger that year. Taking thousands of covers into space for the purpose of selling. They came in a nice glossy pamphlet like this. This is actually one of them, and there are plenty of these out there. They're very affordable. So, like me, you might not be able to get a flown cover from the Apollo 15 mission, but you can own one of the more recent and commercially made covers that flew on the space shuttles. I encourage you all to learn more about the Apollo 15 mission. There's so much that I did not cover, including the Genesis rock, the fallen astronaut sculpture, the Apollo 15 watches, and the Galileo experiment. Also, there are a lot of stamps out there celebrating this Apollo 15 mission, so keep a lookout for them. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.